to get this going. YouTube is kind of getting funky here with like video vertical versus horizontal. But anyways, I'm actually here in Santa Monica. You can see back behind me, we got the pier right back there. We got the beach, the ocean, palm trees and all. I'm actually here for a Bitcoin conference. And I got a little bit of time this morning and just wanted to do a video, I guess, talking about radar detectors and specifically kind of comparing some of the different brands. Something I've been noticing is it's hard, of course, to like compare them in a really simple way. I did a short the other day kind of talking about some of them, and I'm like, there's so much more detail and nuance that I would love to go into, and it always feels like this stuff gets really oversimplified whenever we talk about different brands. So I just kind of wanted to like sit down and just chat with you guys. We'll hang out here live and talk about different brands. So let's see, let's make sure the chat's going and all. Cool. All right, so first things first. Whenever it comes to like comparing different brands and with detectors in general, I think there's always going to be like two main things that I'm looking for. One is performance, of course, and the other one is going to be the false alert filtering. There's a lot of other stuff that we can take a look at as well. You know, how well do the arrows work? The algorithm for the GPS lockouts, RDD immunity, how easy are the firmware updates? What's the customer service like? Like there's always going to be way more stuff, of course, that we can talk about. But I want to focus first on just those two. Now, I guess let's take a look at maybe like some of the biggest brands right now. We'll start here with like, you know, Uniden and Escort and Valentine and all that kind of stuff, because they're, I mean, some of the biggest ones. And we'll, I guess, start with some of the flagships. So I guess we'll also talk about just the detectors first, and then we'd also have to consider, maybe it's going to vary from person to person, but like, what do you need, right? So we can talk about the detectors themselves, performance and features and all that, but it's always going to come down to like, well, what officers running in your area? You know, what's your budget? What's your preferences? Do you have photo radar in your area? What features are most important to you? Like some people want something very technical and hands-on versus other people just like more plug and play. So like we can get into the differences of the detectors, but that's always going to vary, of course, depending on like what you need, you know? So let's start with, I guess, just the detectors. How can we do it simple and then get a little bit more detailed and complex? So like the simple, probably oversimplified version is Escort tries to be very easy to use, plug and play, you know, like kind of set it and forget it, and they err on the side of quietness, right? Valentine is kind of like the other end of the spectrum, I think, with very enthusiast friendly. They're like, hey, you know, we got the arrows, but we don't offer GPS. If you want it, you can do it with your own apps or with third-party apps. Like there's a lot of control that you can get when you're adding other apps. And then Uniden is kind of somewhere in the middle with like, hey, we're going to give you the GPS built in, but it's not going to be quite as plug and play as Escort. The updates aren't as easy to do and stuff. So that's kind of like the high level, I think, perspective, which I know I've talked about in other videos. But maybe going in, like starting with performance, that we can always break down and stuff. How do we measure performance? Long range is always the easiest one to do. I don't really care too much about long range stuff these days. They're all really good. The R8, the V1 Gen 2, R7 even, like the red line and stuff. Nice view. Can you detect police boats behind you? If there are. I didn't bring any like detectors or anything, but yeah, take a look at the beach back there. But like range, I mean, they're all going to be good. We can get into these shootouts, you know, of like which one does better on 33.8 versus 34.7 and how do filtering impact stuff. But like they're all pretty good these days, which is, I'm like, I can do my red barn testing, but like, I don't really care, to be honest. You know, like they're all going to do fine. And that's not really one reason to pick a detector over another. There's also going to be like response time, which I've been doing some of the testing. You know, how fast is it going to begin to alert when the radar gun starts transmitting? We can take a look at some of that. That can be helpful. You can debate how useful it is of like, hey, if it's instant on, you know, the speed's going to pop up on the radar gun almost immediately. So you don't really have a good opportunity to outbreak instant on. So you can always debate like the value of that. But I still think it is really important where like, if there's radar in the area, you need to know quickly so you can respond accordingly. There's things like, you know, what about brief duration signals and quick trigger? How can it handle that? Do officers use that kind of stuff in your area? Like, there's different ways to rate this, you know, and they're all pretty good as far as range. In terms of responsiveness, the Unidens and the Valentines are definitely going to be the best. Escorts are going to be slower, despite all their lightning quick performance claims. The older M3s were actually a lot better when they were using like the BSRDR stuff. But the newer detectors, I guess, with some of the extra filtering, that's been slowing down some of the detectors, even on KA band, which is kind of surprising. I would expect like, hey, you know, maybe more filtering on K band than on KA. KA band should definitely be quick. So I want to see Escort improve upon that. So in terms of like performance, when it comes to range, they're all going to be good. In terms of responsiveness, the Unidens and the Escorts, or sorry, the Unidens and the Valentines are going to be better. I can see Samir's asking in the comments, like, after your recent video about the Redline 360C, I'm wondering if we should switch to the R8. That's actually going to be maybe a good discussion for this. Because again, there's a lot of detail and nuance, and without knowing what you need, without knowing what features are important, I feel like every simple answer to the question is going to be like too oversimplified. Video is real choppy. Sorry, I guess just hopefully the data is good. Can you guys hear it? 56 oval, smooth for me. Is the audio good? Hopefully you guys can like hear me all right and stuff. I don't think the Redline sucks. No. Audio video is fine. Good. Okay, I'm glad to hear that. So, I mean, yes, the Redline has issues, but like every detector has issues. Uniden, they just released their update with, firmware 1.34 for the R8, but it looks like they released that firmware update too early. There's some bugs there. Some people are having GPS issues. I know a lot of people are having issues updating on Macs, for example. Like the current Mac update software doesn't work. They've actually sent me a beta version of their update software, which is working on Mac, but who knows when that's actually going to come out. So like every detector has issues. None of this stuff is perfect, which is going to be kind of like one of the conclusions here of my talk is like none of this stuff is perfect. And I can't tell you how much I wish one was just like awesome across the board where it would make an easy recommendation, you know? So like we've talked a little bit about performance, false alert filtering, which I think is traditionally one of the weaknesses of the Uniden. But the other detectors have their own weaknesses too. So like the escorts or the Unidens and the Valentines, I trust the most when it comes to actually alerting to signals that you need to alert to. I'm not talking about photo radar. I know the V1 is not designed to detect those. The escort and the Unidens can be potentially hit or miss depending on what photo radar system you have. But at least against traditional radar, I have the most trust in the Unidens and the Valentines. Then when it comes to false alert filtering, I feel like there's a lot of nuance in this as well. So when it comes to, I don't know, low speed muting, for example, around Haywood, you can poke holes in every detector. Exactly. Low speed muting. Unidens is going to be the most simplistic approach where they've just got GPS built into the detector, mute below a certain speed. Some detectors can actually vary that. I know like the R7 with the international firmware can give you the automatic, speed. Like based on your speed, it can vary the sensitivity, but just for muting specifically, very simple with the Unidens, just mute below a speed. Escort can do the same thing, but if you tie it into the cloud, it can also vary your low speed muting based on the speed limit, which could be kind of nice to like, as you're driving around different roads, the speed limits change and it can automatically vary your low speed muting. I don't necessarily always like that because it doesn't take into account things like school zones and construction zones. And so you could actually inadvertently be speeding and the detector is muting your signals because it's not aware that the speed limit has temporarily changed. So I'm not super into that dynamic stuff because there's definitely room for errors, but in just the simplistic set it and forget it kind of approach, like that's kind of the idea there. Valentine doesn't have GPS, so it can't do that, but they do sell Savvy, that like OBD2 accessory that plugs your car's OBD2 port, and that can be nice to give you the low speed muting. And that also works in parking garages. So like if you lose GPS because you can't see the sky because you're in a parking garage, sometimes there's like K-band or even Ka-band transmitters in some of those. And so like you can actually get low speed muting even in parking garages with no GPS. Some of the apps can kind of like help with that as well for the other brands of detectors, but that's kind of like a cool approach, So they all have different approaches to low speed muting. When it comes to GPS lockouts, very big differences here. They can all do it in different ways. Escort, they've been doing it the longest. They did it for a while, and then the whole patent troll issue. So I think they're actually the ones who own the patent at the moment for the GPS lockouts. I'm not sure off the top of my head if it's expired. I don't think so, but why would you need a radar in a parking garage? You don't, but you're gonna have false alerts in parking garages, and your GPS low-speed muting is gonna be deactivated, and so you're gonna wind up getting a bunch of annoying falses in parking garages and parking decks. So having the low-speed muting can help deal with those falses. As far as the GPS lockouts, Escort, I think their approach is designed because they're erring on the side of quietness. Their lockouts are going to be the most aggressive. So they're really trying to lock signals out quickly and keep signals locked out once they are locked out. There's always a lot of discussion like, is that going to lock out police officers? Potentially, yes, they can all do that, but there's going to be situations where like police radar guns are typically a lot more strong than automatic door openers. So a lot of times you can pick them up farther than before you actually approach the GPS lockout zone. So if the cop's shooting radar, you're gonna pick it up before you get to like the shopping center or something, so you can get the lockout or the alert before you get to the lockout zone. Additionally, the GPS lockouts are only for like a certain frequency range. Again, varies depending on detector and even firmware. This stuff actually changes, different brands. But the idea is it's only going to be locking out a certain section of K-band, not all of it at once. And so chances are the door opener is going to be transmitting here. The police radar gun is transmitting over there. So it's a different frequency, even if it's in a similar location. Again, there's a lot more detail and nuance. We can get into GPS lockout algorithms, but the idea is there are some safeguards built in to hopefully help you minimize the risk of inadvertently locking out and muting a police officer, even though you're trying to do a door opener. It gets complex when you got a bunch of door opener falses and the GPS radiuses can change, and again, more complex nuance here. But Escort's going to be the most aggressive to try and keep those muted. Uniden is going to be, you guys are asking about the new update. The update's actually been pulled for the Uniden. For most people, it seems like it's been fine. I like some of the improvements, but a number of people have been having GPS issues, and there's workarounds with like resetting the detector or clearing your lockouts and stuff. So looks like they're trying to fix that. If you have the update, I find it pretty helpful. I haven't run it a ton, I think just a little bit, but there's a ton of discussion on the forums if you want to check out the latest Uniden update for the R8. As far as the R8's lockouts, one of the improvements that I've been hearing is it seems like there's actually been some improvements to the GPS lockouts, which has long been a complaint on the Unidens. The custom firmware for the R7 from Mitharu, that's got some nice improvements for lockouts. I've been hearing some people saying that like the lockouts for this latest R8 firmware is actually helping to improve things. I can't say for sure. There wasn't an official changelog posted to know whether or not that's actually been changed. And Uniden pulled the firmware anyway, so we'll have to see kind of like what gets released. But traditionally, the lockouts are not as good as the Uniden, but they may actually finally be getting a handle on that. So we'll have to see. Valentine, obviously no GPS built in, so there are no lockouts. Valentine's app, you have no lockouts. It's only third-party apps. Your JBV1 or Highway Radar on Android, or on iOS, you've got V1 Companion and V1 Driver. You've got your GPS lockouts. They typically work better than what you have on any of the Unidens or Escort apps built in, but you do have to tie it into an app, which has its own pros and cons, of course, as well. So it works well, but you got to use an app. So different approaches depending on how you want to do it. They all have their pros and cons. Blind spot filtering, this one is tough to say for sure. Like the Escorts, for example, the new update seems to trigger more false alerts now, unlike the red lines than we saw before. Traditionally, Escorts, again, are erring on the side of quietness. They were pretty good. I know a lot of people are like, hey, I can drive for an hour, I get maybe one blind spot false. That's awesome, you know, compared to like the Unidens, you'll get more, but then they're dealing with like K-blocks and stuff, which is sort of a simplistic and kind of stupid approach. It's a Band-Aid, you know, for like the dealing with blind spot falses. Valentine, with their advanced logic mode, they're trying to do something a little bit more sophisticated, so they're kind of in between with a little more filtering on certain BSM frequency ranges, which I think is a cool idea. But Uniden gives you a whole variety of approaches for how the K-blocks are being implemented, so you can find the right balance for how aggressive you want to be with filtering depending on what frequency range and if cops use K-band in your area. So there's a whole bunch of stuff you can go into with like controlling and fine-tuning how the stuff is working, but again, it's not really cut and dry with like which one is the best, you know, which ones are the most effective. Like, it's kind of tough to say. There's not an easy way to compare that stuff. Let's see in the questions. Any news of a successor to the R8? There are, it looks like, a leak of the R4W and the R8W, which SEMA is actually coming up. I'll be in Vegas here in a couple weeks, so Uniden will be at the show, so we'll see if they're actually going to be talking about the new R4 and R8 with Wi-Fi, kind of what the benefits are, how all that stuff works. Basically, 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi built in, a lot like the Escorts. So curious to see kind of like what feature adds that'll be. If that's going to be replacing the R4 and the R8, I don't know. If it's going to be like I know Escort does a Wi-Fi and a non-Wi-Fi version. I'm curious to see if that's what Uniden's going to do as well. Maybe different price points depending on like what they want to do. So I don't know. I mean, but it looks like there's a new version, but I don't know if like the R4 and the R8 are going to be discontinued or anything. So that's kind of like filtering versus performance. They all have their pros and cons and different approaches. And then you've got, I mean, just a whole bunch of other stuff. Matt, you're asking any word on laser jammers for the R8? I'll ask at SEMA as well. Laser jammer integration. Uniden maybe one day will finally release their laser jammers, the standalone, to be compatible with the R4 and the R8. I have no idea when, hopefully soon. Escort offers that with their like ZR6 jammers. V1 will let you do it on Android. If you've got the TMG, for example, you can get integration there. I'm not a huge fan of the TMGs, but you do have some capabilities there. Arrows. Valentine traditionally are going to be the gold standard there. Anecdotally, I've heard the most complaints with the Escorts on the arrow effectiveness, where like it's not flipping properly or points the wrong direction. So just what I see in the comments, I see the most complaints on the Escorts for the aero effectiveness. I haven't tested it in a while, but that's kind of what I've been seeing. Uniden, maybe somewhere in between. The arrows seem to be a little bit more flip happy. They're faster to change. It seems like the Escorts are a little bit more sluggish, I guess, taking their time to do analysis, whereas the Unidens change more quickly. So different approaches there. The displays themselves, the Unidens have the bigger displays, which a lot of people like, especially as your eyes start to get a little older. Though Uniden and Escorts use the multicolor OLED displays, which are nice and they're pretty, but if it's sunny like this, they're going to struggle to actually be visible in the sunlight. And OLEDs in general, this is not a radar detector thing, but just OLEDs in general, they start to fade over time. And so you're going to see degradation. They're not as bright. You've got burn-in that will happen as a detector has been running for a couple years with like the same stuff on the display. And so there's definitely going to be some trade-offs there. And there's actually some squirrels down here. It looks like people leave out food. And there's a bunch of squirrels eating. So they're hanging out here. Let's see in the comments. Arrows on the Uniden are fine. I'm glad they're working for you. So for crawfish. Let's see, Victor, the only bad thing about the R8 is it doesn't have Wi-Fi. I'm sure if the R8 puts Wi-Fi, yeah, we'll have to see kind of like how well it works and what the benefits are. Maybe it'll offer like firmware updates. I'm actually hopeful that might be one of the biggest features, just because like the Uniden firmware update process stinks. It's probably the most broken of the three brands. Valentine is pretty good. They've got, you know, you can update over Bluetooth. It works pretty well. It takes 10, 15 minutes, whatever. And you can do it Android and iOS. Valentine's app, it works really well for that. Escort, they also do a good job with this as well. Say what you will about the quality of what's within the updates and if it actually fixes issues, but their update software for Windows and Mac, it works well. There's rarely issues with that. Wi-Fi, you got good connectivity, you can do that as well. So like park near your house for your home Wi-Fi or in the car, it can update automatically. So you don't have to be necessarily even running the apps. It's just there's an update available, a new GPS database, you get notification, and you can just update right in the car. It does prevent your detector from from detecting while it's updating. But I love the capability from like a convenience aspect. So again, that whole like set it and forget it, just let it do everything for you. I think the Wi-Fi is a really nice benefit. I kind of poo-pooed it initially and I was like, why do we need this? But since I've gotten used to it, it's actually pretty cool. I mean, not gonna lie. So I'm hopeful. You guys were asking like, why would Uniden need Wi-Fi? Because their update process stinks. It's broken on Mac. You can't update your detectors on Mac currently. Windows, there's issues there as well. People having issues with the update software, getting the drivers installed, or the USB cable, it's not always compatible. Like there's just, it is the worst easily of the three. There's new update software that they're working on for Macs to even re-support their detectors as well so that we can continue updating. It's just a pain in the butt. And so I'm hoping that with Wi-Fi connectivity, if they at least offer firmware updates, then that could simplify the process. Because like every time there's a new update, in the back of my head, I'm always dreading, because I know people are going to complain in the comments of like, hey, I've been having issues updating, I can't do it. And there's always like, go over to the forums for tech support. A lot of people are having issues. It's always the case. So I'm hopeful that the Wi-Fi update process helps to simplify this for people. Like it's a thing, you know? So there's Wi-Fi. There's RDD immunity. Escorts are really good with this. The M3 platform is excellent. The V1 Gen 2 is also really good too. Unidens are very hit or miss. The R7s, I did some Spectre testing with, I think, R7 on 1.57, the international firmware, but I've heard 1.59 has actually got some improvements on the RDD immunity. It just came out. Assuming when I get back home, like the weather's nice and I have time, I can do some retesting with the Spectres on the R7 with the international firmware. That's a little complicated with how it works based on speed, can even vary that. It also impacts performance, which is not the case on the Valentine and the Escort. So again, it's gonna be a little bit more complex, but it's cool to see that there's some RDD immunity options that are being added here to the Unidens that are actually gonna be able to be done in software, not just in hardware. So build quality. People give Unidens a hard time for their plasticky build quality, and it's totally true. In fact, the other day I saw somebody saying like, I prefer my Escorts over the Unidens. I like it because of the build quality. And I was like, hey, to each their own. I mean, I prefer detectors that protect me when I'm driving. Build quality is very much secondary, but everybody has their preferences, you know? So like, Unidens tend to be plasticky and light. I've even heard people joking about putting like something heavy inside the detector to make it feel more sturdy and strong, to give like the appearance of solidity and heft or something. But yes, they are plasticky. Doesn't necessarily affect performance, but they are plasticky and kind of light and cheap feeling. The Escorts are heavier, particularly like the Redline platform with like the M3 or we call it M12 or whatever it is under there. That's definitely gonna be heavier. Valentines are somewhere in between. The case is kind of like the magnesium case. It's lighter, but still feels solid, which I really like. So build quality is a factor. Customer service, I've seen complaints with all three, but in different ways. I've heard good experiences. Redenso, I've heard actually pretty good things as far as their customer service. I know we've sort of been like overlooking them just because the DS1 is mostly outclassed by the R4. The Pro M I don't care about. The RCM I feel like is outdated at this point. Thea, just release it. There's nothing to talk about with Thea. Yeah. So, I mean, there's like a whole, I'm sure there's other stuff that we could talk about as well that I haven't even gotten into. I know we've done display and RDD immunity and performance and updates. Like there's, as you can see, a lot of complexity to this. And so then the question is like, that's great, but we've already been chatting here for 20 minutes. Can you just give me a simple answer? Which one is the best? And so it's always like, how do you simplify all of this and everything that I haven't talked about yet? And also typically do it without even considering people's personal preferences and where they drive. It's like, how do you do this without oversimplifying to the point of being incomplete and potentially even misleading? So that's difficult. And so that's kind of where it comes back to like Escort's the easiest consumer-friendly plug-and-play option, but then they've got issues sometimes with updates and making sure that it can alert to everything as needed. Would that affect most people? Probably not. Which is why we don't see a bunch of people running around saying, oh, I just got a ticket running my Escort, you know? But still, Unitons I think are kind of maybe the best intermediary option of just like, this is the go-to as far as better performance around, you know, in terms of range and responsiveness than the Escorts. Filtering is not as good, but you can make it good with some of the K-blocks. Updates stink, but hopefully one day gets good. Valentine, I really like their options. I just wish it was easier to like get everything running without having to putz around with apps and all the complexity. V1 Companion does a really good job, I think. JBV1 is also very good, but man, there's a lot of depth that you can go into with that. I know people have been asking about, what about with Mike V? That's certainly a big question mark with his passing. I'm sure he had a plan in place with, you know, what to do when he's no longer, you know, part of Valentine, the company. I don't know yet. I mean, I'm certainly not going to like ask Valentine. They'll figure it out. I'm sure they had some like plan of succession and the other engineers who were involved, like how they're going to approach things and maintaining his legacy and his thought process on what he wants in a detector and building it along his vision for a detector. So we'll have to see. You know, Mike was not the only person involved, even though he was obviously a big part of it. So, oh, man, one thing that I've been wondering is like, I have in the past pulled Escort as a recommended detector when I find pretty significant performance issues. And I've been thinking about that yet again with some of the latest testing that I've been doing. And I don't know if I'm at that point, but I've been very seriously considering it. I don't know if I need to see more testing. I've just been going back and forth in my head. I don't like recommending stuff if there's really serious issues. I obviously hope that they can address it and get it fixed. Like the ALP thing that I mentioned, that I think would be much more easy for ALP to fix with some of the Dragon Eye stuff, considering they've previously had firmware that's been able to jam it more reliably. Versus Escort, I don't know if they've had like really good performance on the red line and false alert filtering at the same time. So there's a lot of new stuff that they would have to create to get it working, where honestly I would be more comfortable with it, you know? And then same thing, I've been thinking about like custom installed stuff, the Redline CI360C versus Uniton R9 versus the Stinger versus maybe the Redenso RCM with the ALP. So I haven't been thinking as much about that, but that's definitely something I've been thinking about as well, along the same time. But that's, I guess, kind of my thought process right now. Does that, for you guys, kind of sound similar to how you would think about it? Is there anything maybe that I haven't talked about or addressed as far as comparing the ones that you're like, Vortex, you know, like photo radar, for example? I didn't get into that into a ton of detail. Not really something that I've done a ton of testing, or I don't need it in my area, so it's not something I think about a ton. But I know for some people, obviously, that's very important. So kind of curious to hear like your guys, you know, your thoughts in the chat as well. And then while you guys are talking about that, we can also transition and talk about laser jammers. I didn't know if I was actually going to like get into all that in this video as well, but you've got like the ALP, of course, which needs some updates. I've been hearing some rumors of like maybe behind the scenes are really kind of getting on top of this stuff, and I hope so, because like I want to see them for their sake and for everybody like me who runs an ALP. Like, let's do this, you know, let's get your jamming on point where it needs to be. The United's performance seems to be pretty good. It does throw more jam codes and stuff. We'll have to see if they release something standalone for the R4, the R8, and maybe the R4W and R8W. Been a long time waiting for that, so hopefully that comes to fruition. The Escorts, I like the new the VX shifters or the ZR6s better than I did the old Shifter Max ones. But I'd like to see some optimizations on like the firmware and stuff. But those are better than before. You guys are asking like the R9 improvements since release. Yeah, they've had some improvements. I still want to see some display improvements. That's something I haven't really gotten into. Is the R9 has the most confusing arrows. Maybe the RCM can be confusing as well, the Redenso. But depending on what display mode you use, the R9, the arrow display can be kind of confusing. There's, I know we talked about it like multiple times at the Tennessee meet. We were actually going over that as well with the Uniden rep who was there, and we were showing them, and everybody was kind of confused because sometimes you can have 3 different arrows on the display at the same time, and you're like, where the heck is the signal coming from? So depending on what display mode you're using, it can be kind of confusing. But coming back to laser, Stinger, I want them to work. I love the tiny heads, but performance can be pretty hit or miss. Yeah, it surprisingly did not perform as well as I had hoped, and we discovered a number of different bugs in testing with the Stinger. So I sent all that information over to Stinger with videos and logs and detail and everything. I haven't really heard back from them since, so nothing to report as far as updates or improvements or identification of what the bugs and issues were or anything. So not really anything, I guess, to report on Stinger in terms of updates. TMG, I continue to have issues with that, reliability issues with quality and the heads and the cables and output algorithms and just all sorts of stuff that, like, I want to like it as kind of an affordable solution that has Bluetooth and stuff, but nah. The TPX, I can see GSB, you're asking about that. I'm starting to lean towards the TPX as like the affordable solution. Even though it's a simple jammer, right? It's basic, it's inexpensive, but just for something you can throw in the car and it works decently well, that's kind of where I'm thinking for like kind of the basic inexpensive one. I would prefer having something with like audio alerts to let you know what gun you're getting shot with, or maybe having 3 heads in the rear instead of being limited to 2. Unless you're facing a lot of drag and eye in the rear, for a lot of people you can probably get by with just 2 heads, especially on smaller cars, but like that is a weakness of that system. I do prefer having more available, but obviously that's going to cost more if you want to spring for like an ALP or a Uniden compared to like a TPX or something. So the TPX I'm kind of starting to lean to as like the inexpensive solution. And then who else is there? K40 we don't count. Rocky Mountain Radar we obviously don't count. Is there anybody I'm missing? The Kaio Pro Park 3. I mean, that's an old, out-of-date one as well. You guys are asking about the R7 stuff. Let's see. The new Euro blinder. Yeah, that one, I mean, I don't really test international stuff too much. That's not something for sale here. It's not really designed for us. It's kind of a cool idea. I actually saw there was an update for their app, I think yesterday, for the European blinder. Cool idea. I don't know how much testing I'm going to be doing with it, just because, like, I prefer to focus on the stuff that's available here in the US. It's designed for us. I'm always hoping to see like more people who want to do testing and reviews and comparisons for drivers in New Zealand, in Saudi Arabia, in Israel, in Australia, in Eastern Europe, different countries throughout there, like in Western Europe, you know, the laws vary, the detectors vary, sometimes you get by with just bribing the police officer, like whatever things. There's for international firmware, there's just so many differences overseas that, like, that's a whole can of worms that I don't really want to get into, that I don't really have a good way of keeping up on or testing or any of that stuff. So I try to leave most of that stuff for others, hoping somebody would, like, more people step up and do that. Unless there's something super interesting, like, hey, Blinder, you know, here's a story, here's the tie back to Escort, here's something cool and interesting that they're doing with the wireless stuff that other people don't do. It's a cool idea. And then same thing with like the Genevo, and I think Neoline might be doing a W-band stuff, but Genevo has their W-band radar detector, 77 gigahertz. Doesn't detect X, K, and Ka. It's strictly W, it seems like. So just kind of like keeping an eye on that kind of stuff without getting too much into it. So yeah, let's see. So laser, I'm gonna have to think about some more and how ALP ties in. I'm definitely gonna be watching. Let's see, are you worried about W-band in the US? Not really, no. I haven't heard anything about that. I mean, maybe companies will start working on it for some of their international detectors, and eventually, if that ever one day shows up here, At least they have the technology in development. That was kind of a question with like KU band. There's a few KU band guns, I think in like Western Europe or something, but that never came to the US. That was never really a thing. Cobra, I think, tried marketing that for a little while to try and differentiate themselves from the competition, but that was never really a thing. So not really something I'm worried about, but maybe internationally companies can work on that. And if it ever shows up here, then at least they've done the R&D and they can roll it out here to our North American detectors too. But I'm not really worried about it too much. With laser, I'm keeping an eye on the ALP to see like what they do as far as firmware updates. I'm not thrilled, obviously, seeing the issues with like stalker jamming getting disabled, and then we realized it in testing and they're like, oops, but then they at least fixed it the next day. I'm curious to see like what's going to happen with future updates. Uniden seems to be pretty good. I'm liking them. I just hope to see they release maybe a standalone jammer as well, so you don't have to spring for the full R9. Escorts, I haven't had a chance to test the ZR6, but I mean, it's a similar idea to the ZR5. It's the same heads as the Redline that I have installed on my car that I've already tested and I'm familiar with. So like, I have a good idea, even though I haven't technically used those specific ones. Maybe we'll take a look at it at SEMA and see if there's anything specific to the ZR6 that's worth noting and discussing. TMG, it's one I keep wanting to like on paper, but I just keep running into issues in practice. Let's see, 56 oval. What's the update on laser jammers in the EV9? So I'm planning on doing that install, maybe January, February. We're thinking doing it over the holidays sometime. But holiday trips with the family is gonna be taking precedence, so probably after the holidays just for the install. Been looking at placement as well. For the grill, I wanna do some of the like black spots in the grill, but a lot of it depends on like once we get the car in the shop and we pull the bumper, we can see what's actually behind there. Is there like IR transmissive plastic we can replace some of the existing plastic with? Is there something back behind there that's actually gonna be blocking laser jam replacement? I don't actually know until we get into the shop. And then the rear is gonna be a little bit compromised, I think, as far as even where we can stick those rear heads. So it'll be a little bit tricky. We're gonna be doing the R9 on that one, which I think is a pretty solid decision. I'm happy with that over like the Redline or something, or even like ALP RCM. So I'm happy that we're gonna be going with the R9. Oh, hey squirrel, you're just hanging out here in the shade. Look at this. Hey buddy. Oh, and he ran off. Never mind. Found a little squirrel hanging out here next to me. But anyways, I guess that's just sort of my thoughts. I know I did a fairly long discussion. It's been about half an hour, over half an hour. We've been hanging out and chatting about this stuff, but it's always a tough balance to figure out how do we talk about all this stuff and then how do you simplify it as much as possible without being oversimplified, because obviously not everybody wants to like do a whole discussion like this. And like, what are the big takeaways? And so the best that I've been able to come up with so far is kind of what I mentioned at the beginning with like, the Uniden might be the best balance for most people in between ease of use, but still actually giving you good performance. The Escort really kind of focusing on ease of use. The Valentine I think is really good for enthusiasts. Maybe I should start recommending it more of like, it's not that big of a deal to grab a third-party app, and they're really good. And they add some nice capabilities. They're like, okay, you don't have a frequency display, but most people don't need that. And if you have it on the phone, you can get the frequency display for multiple signals. So if you really need that information, it's there. So again, depending on like whatever stuff is important. Let's see, simplified would have to be different for different classes of licenses and different capabilities of drivers and vehicles. Yeah, so yes, balancing the detectors with what vehicle you drive and where you drive. It's like, that stuff always gets complex. So try and never find a good way, like the optimal balance. And I'm always kind of like playing with that. And I try to simplify it, but inevitably people are like, well, you didn't mention this and that and that. And I'm like, well, yeah, it's the simplified version. I'm trying to keep it simple. And by definition, it means we're going to leave out a lot of stuff. So find the best balance of all that is kind of tricky. Let's see, you're asking, what's the advantage of seeing the frequencies? I've actually done a whole video about that, determining what police radar guns are in use. So you can detect what department is it. I can tell like if it's highway patrol, 33.8, more likely to be on the highway versus 34.7 or 35.5, probably more in the city, which can be useful if I'm driving down the highway to know is it maybe less likelihood that there's an officer actually up in front of me versus maybe I'm just picking up radar like a nearby surface street, or I guess maybe streets are that way. So something like that. Determining blind spot falses, if you see it alert to like 24.123 and you see there's a Mazda in front of you, you're like, oh, cool. Okay, that's just a Mazda CX-5. So You can get a lot of useful information from that, seeing maybe like a frequency change. You're like, oh, okay, maybe it's a new police officer, or switching to his front to his rear radar antenna. You get a lot more information than just the bogey counter or the arrows or the strength meter and stuff. So it's just part of understanding what all is going on around you, more than just, if the detector beeps, I slow down, and if it doesn't, okay. Like, there's just more understanding that you get by really diving into the frequency, for example. And I've done a whole video that you can check out, understanding radar detector frequency displays and stuff. 33.8 could be a Cobra. Yeah, depending on the signal, it could be a Ka band false, but a lot of different stuff. So anyways, I just wanted to like sit down and kind of hash this out with you guys and go over it. That's just sort of my latest thought process on radar detectors. For the end of the year, I'll do kind of like a better, not just live stream and think aloud with you guys, but like sit down and really go over this with like B-roll and showing you guys the detectors in more detail. So like best radar detectors video at the end of the year, always do that. But that's kind of where things stand so far. Keeping an eye on like the new Unitons coming out. How is Escort going to respond with their firmware updates? Valentine, long term, what's I guess going to happen with the company? Just because with Mike Valentine, that's certainly a big question mark. So that's maybe the stuff that I'm going to be keeping an eye out above and beyond what we know today and how things have been looking so far throughout this year. I believe Escort's actually improved the performance. The latest update for the red lines, V1 has improved the performance with 4.1035, so we can go out and test that. But like, even if I tested it and I find one is better than the other, that's still not a reason to like pick one detector over another. So I'm not actually really prioritizing the red barn testing and the long range courses. So anyways, kind of want to just go walk down the strip, enjoy the palm trees and the sunshine, and then we've actually got something going on over this way in about an hour or so, so I'm gonna head over there too, maybe grab a bite to eat. But anyways, yeah, thanks to all you guys for hanging out and just chatting radar detectors, laser jammers, and the state of how everything is going. So hope you guys are doing well, and that's it for now. Take care. I'll catch you later.